applications and use cases?
Well, I think it's better to start with Toby along with this question. Yeah, because I'm not very experienced on Fetch applications, so that I think the second question, in which field blockchain will be more useful, I can connect it with what Toby commented and emphasized, and then I can continue on that.
Yes,
okay?
exactly.
So,
I was planning to ask Toby first, and then let you to have own comments about what Toby said.
Well, I think it's better to start with the first question with Toby and ask me the second question in connection with what Toby commented, because I think it's much better to comment both of them, because in which field blockchain will be more useful and more applicable, especially in Turkey, is also related with what Toby said in the first question. I think it's much better to move forward. And how long will the this
like we thought like 45 minutes for discussion and 15 minutes for question and answer session.
So the one hour in total, huh?
Yeah, and it will be 1 hour in total.
Okay, so we have 3 minutes left. So
So I guess that as well as the questions and answers, we also try and engage in, well, just like we were doing, in fact, very interesting conversations about all of this.
Sure.
And you've done better than I with your background, by the way. Of course, you've actually got a bookshelf, which I believe is the appropriate thing to have. Whereas I've got an empty wall and a light. So I think when it comes to appropriate backgrounds, you win.
Well, actually, it was the opposite in the beginning. Let me show you. I mean, this one. So, but I didn't like it. So I changed my, chair, and then suddenly had a very, smart background. So that makes me smarter than I am.
By surrounding yourself in books. I should have built a tower of books behind me, but.
Well, and also it's also criticized in social media whether I have read all these books or not, and then
should I hang on? Let me see. Should I be testing you on these books just to be sure?
Well, I think Saifed Anamor's book, Bitcoin book. I guess there is some. The books are about new media. I think this. The Saifedan's book, and also they're in Turkish, but this is Paul Vigne and Michael Casey's Cryptocurrency Age it's all about Bitcoin and else. So, and also the big data, the platform economy, gamification. I'm a new media teacher, so that's mainly digital media and the network and blockchain, the stuff and else. So. Well, we have 1 minute left.
Well, according to my clock, 0 minutes left. It's time to begin, I believe.
Well, yes.
Yeah, okay, then should I believe right now?
Good luck.
Thank you.
So, hello everyone, glad to have you all here. Welcome to this webinar series by Blockchain Education Network Turkey. Today we will be talking about artificial intelligence and blockchain, the technologies of the future, and what convergence of AI and blockchain means for Turkey and world's infrastructure, and what opportunities and risks are at stake. Today's webinar will last for an hour, and after 45 minutes of discussion, we will have 15 minutes question and answer session. You can write your question in the chat box on Zoom, and there will be available, a recorded version will be available on YouTube after this webinar. We are also streaming on line in YouTube right now. I'm Arzum from Ben Turkey, and here to moderate this discussion. Today we will have two speakers, Toby Simpson from Fetch.ai. He is the CTO and co-founder of the company. He was one of the original developers at AI company DeepMind, acquired by Google 2014, and he is focusing on decentralized and distributed problem solving and converging digital intelligence with crypto economics to build more efficient and seamless future economy. On the other side, we have İsmail Hakkı Polat. Since 2004, he is founder of the Communication and New Media Lab at Kadir University. His ideas and comments are published in print in the corner of Bloomberg Business Magazine in Turkey each week. And he is also teaching cryptocurrencies and blockchain courses at Kadir University. So we wanted to get them together today to discuss about these emerging technologies and the Turkish market of the blockchain. So thanks for being here, both of you. We are very much appreciate for your time and discussing and talking these emerging technologies with us. So let's just simply start into our discussion. My first question is, can you briefly explain blockchain and AI technologies in your own perspective? And Mr. Simpson, maybe you can also mention the Fetch applications and use cases for the audience to get knowledge about these emerging technologies. So, Mr. Simpson, do you want to start first?
Sure, great. Well, it's lovely to be here. Thank you very much. And I like the fact that you said, can you briefly explain Bitcoin, blockchain and AI? And I challenge anybody to briefly explain blockchain in a way that makes sense. It's one of those wonderful technologies. I liken it to learning to ride a bike. It's almost impossible until suddenly you get it. And then that's it. You know how to ride a bike, but you can't explain how to do it to anybody else. It's one of those sort of acquired things. And also it doesn't exist in isolation. Blockchain is an incredible piece of technology, but one of the things that's very interesting right now is we've got this perfect alignment of technologies out there, particularly some of the very interesting developments in AI, and in particular machine learning. And when you start combining all of these things, then you get something really interesting. And from my perspective, one of the things that's always interested me is the level of complexity in the world that we have right now. I mean, it's insanely complex, particularly the digital economy, and it's not getting any better, it's getting worse and worse. There's an incredible number of moving parts in almost everything that we do. And anybody who thinks that they can manage and orchestrate all of those moving parts from a centralized point of view is deluding themselves. There are just too many dumb bits and pieces. And one of the things that interested us when we were first thinking about Fetch is, well, if we were able to bring all of these component parts to life, effectively create digital entities that lived inside data, IoT devices, services, technology, people, and we were able to create an environment that was large enough, then we could potentially introduce the things that want something to the things that have something and do that entirely autonomously. And what blockchain brings to that party is the ability to do it at scale, because we can have a vast number of individual components and we can connect them all together without having any centralized pinch point. And this we thought was a really interesting marriage of technologies, and it would need a few extra bits and pieces on top of it. But we would take advantage of the fact that we're in this wonderful position right now, that whilst blockchain is useful in its own right, when you join it with AI and other cryptographic technologies like verifiable credentials, you can create a trusted environment for people to get things done without human intervention. I can carry on talking about it.
Thank you, Mr. Simpson, for that. And I want to move to Professor Ismail. And in which field do you think blockchain will be more useful and more applicable in Turkey? And what do your comments on what Mr. Simpson said?
Well, actually, I'm not. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me. Thanks to Sabancı Club and the university clubs and also Fetch.ai.
Thank you for your contribution and your time.
Thank you. In addition, what Toby said, I mean, the intersection of blockchain AI for me is to tame AI from becoming a big brother, let me say, in one word, because I mean the path AI entered in right now is a threat for the all humanity, actually. So that blockchain is a way to cure it or to, you know, to tame it, let's say. And also, I mean, coming to your question, of course, I mean, it's very complex, as Toby said, to combine the two complex thing. I mean, I'm an expert in new media, for example, but I'm a, let's say, beginner or intermediate level in blockchain and cryptocurrency, I can say, I confess. And I'm a superficial, you know, informed people in AI, of course. But of course, I can, you know, comment on the intersections as being a, you know, engineer, as an, you know, analytic mindset and else. So, I mean, for me, I mean, blockchain and AI are more useful, especially blockchain are more useful for the industries and social communities who work with multi-parties within a business or social ecosystem. Blockchain is an appropriate solution for them. Blockchain's peer-to-peer, user-private, open ledger, and crypto-secure network structure helps commercial and social bodies to re-establish the trust in a decentralized way by eliminating the intermediaries, such as notaries, banks, and even the government bureaucracy. So, I mean, we have one thing on our hands. And also, when we add AI to this picture, the decentralization is a way to prevent us from becoming a super centralized solution for the government bureaucracy, for the notaries, for the banks, and else. Of course, all these traditional parties will have resistance to blockchain and will, you know, miss and will love AI in that sense. But in time, the societies and companies, when they figured out that, especially the societies figured out that it's an efficient and effective way, and also a fair way to move forward, their resistance will be broken, like it happened in to the anti-digital campaigners during the COVID-19 pandemic. Okay, they were the campaigners of anti-digital, you know. They were the campaigners of, you know, teaching not in digital. For example, I'm a teacher, have been trying to defend the online education for more than 10 years, and I have some, you know, experience and forth, but it was not sustainable. Why? Because of the resistance of the, you know, the old school minded, you know, the administrations and especially the teacher mindset. But what happened COVID-19? All of them were disappeared, and suddenly we were digitalized in one night, from primary schools to universities. So we need such an enlightenment. Hope it was not happened, or it will not be happened in a, you know, disastrous way like COVID-19. But sooner or later, if it's not a revolution, it will become an evolution thanks to the new generation like you, Arzum. Thank you.
It was an interesting inflection point, actually, with everything that's gone on, as you say. I'm very curious because I think you made a good point that we all went from being analog and old school to suddenly having to become entirely digital almost overnight. And it's funny just how adaptable human beings are when they're presented with a situation like that. And for all these years, we've looked at all of these technologies, particularly things like video conferencing systems, as been not really a very practical thing. And then suddenly we all get to have to use it all, and it improves very, very rapidly. I think you made another very good point about the intermediaries and what decentralization can potentially do to those. Because I mean, I see this a lot in the economy, particularly as a lot of these large centralized intermediaries in, say, ride hailing or delivering packages and food. Really, they're just economic dating agencies. They act as the trusted element that sits in the middle and introduces somebody who wants something to somebody who has it. And they take a hefty cut for doing that.
And they abuse it.
Exactly. And they get into their blitz scale businesses. They get to a level where they have enormous control over what happens. And that's not good for the value provider. because so much has been taken off that. And it's the same thing in travel and hospitality. Of course, from the user's perspective, these businesses are fantastic. I mean, there's nothing quite like getting off an aeroplane, firing up an app, and then having a car pick you up and take you to your hotel, no matter where you land. And that's very attractive. You know, you only have to give your credit card information to one company, and you've got one seamless app. And it's the same with booking hotels. You know, you've got one seamless app to compare them all. But that convenience that we have as users comes at a cost. And that cost is the personalization and the uniqueness that you get when individual value providers are able to keep what it is that they get, as opposed to handing over a large amount. And blockchain and its associated technologies allows for disintermediation. And that's very, very exciting because amongst other things, it allows for this thing I call economic Lego, where all of these businesses currently, the centralized businesses, they exist in isolation. Whereas if the whole thing is decentralized, you can combine them in interesting ways. So a value provider with a car can potentially deliver, as I've put it, pizza packages and people, sometimes all at once, and be in control of that value. And these technologies that we've got, AI is there to provide interesting interpretations of trust, reputation, but also to optimize things like routes and packages in order to ensure all of this stuff works as efficiently as it can be. And we've got these wonderful cryptographic technologies like verifiable credentials, so that you as an individual can prove to yourself that the vehicle that's going to pick you up is insured, licensed, taxed, and all of the other things that are important to you before you even set off. We can govern the handling of disputes in insurance, and handing over value entirely with smart contracts and tokens on these decentralized networks. And that's super exciting because it's scalable and it's reliable as well. And this is something else that you touched on. One of the things that I love about the bottom-up approach is you end up with a very large population of simple things. It's much easier to guarantee something's success when you make it out of a large population of little bits. You know, you take a pile of Lego bricks and you can build the Millennium Falcon or a bunch of other things just like that. And physics takes care of ensuring you can't construct a syntax error, because if you build an upside down pyramid, it'll fall over when you get to about a meter, no matter what you do. And that stability and that scalability and that security and self-service trust, I think, are a key part of what happens when we start converging these technologies.
Today, I read an article about, a private messaging platform, decentralized, and, only users, they are end-to-end encrypted, and also only users have the control, whereas there is no, trusted party like Facebook or any other people.
Exactly.
So that, it's a very good development, or it's a very good step for the humanity.
I agree, because suddenly all that utility value that we carry around with us all the time, all the stuff that's ours, suddenly belongs to us again. I mean, obviously there are downsides to this, and one of the things that people often said about Bitcoin is, well, be your own bank. How exciting is that? And you know what? There's a lot of people who prefer not to be their own bank. You know, there's a risk associated with that. And this is one of the things when it comes to explaining what blockchain is to people. That nobody really understands, because we use terms like wallet when actually it isn't a wallet. And we use terms like private and public key, and people generally don't understand what these things mean, because we don't talk about it in terms of what it does. That proof of ownership, that ability to be able to sign something and knowing that nobody else can have done it, so you can prove that you did it. And you combine that with these other technologies, and that means that you can move digital ownership of an asset, be it a token or something else, around, and do it in a decentralized way. And we don't talk about it in those terms. We talk about these isolated pieces of technology. But you're right. I think that's one of the things that excites me most, that the control over that utility value suddenly belongs to you. And right now, there's a few very large-scale digital organizations, which we all know and love very well, who help themselves to the data that they need to off their phone in order to provide traffic updates, number of people in a restaurant. But that's your value. Why aren't you been paid for it? Why isn't your phone just clocking up digital tokens for you just as a result of you walking around. And when you take the centralized entity out, you build this stuff in a decentralized way, well, that can happen. And all that hidden value that you've got that currently goes undiscovered or unused or wasted, and we are very, very wasteful, particularly with data, can suddenly be used. That's very exciting. It's very efficient as well, getting more out of the assets in the economy that we already have, rather than keep having to add more to stay where we are.
Yeah, thank you for that discussion. I think that was a really nice discussion between you. And I'm going to ask my next question. And we were talking about this technological transformation in the world after the coronavirus mostly. So how do you feel about the role of the blockchain on this digital transformation, mostly in Turkey? And there is a lot of questions in people's minds about blockchain. So can this technological transformation bring any complexities or people have lots of concern and questions about blockchain? So is there any complexities like social economic difficulties for institutions or individuals or like governments, let's say? So who would like to start? Maybe Professor Ismail, you can start.
Well, actually, as a blockchain lecturer, I mean it's my most important issue to tackle with. I mean the complexity, and also I regard this complexity as becoming interdisciplinary. Okay, so I mean as a university teacher, I mean in 20th centuries or in industry age education system or academic system, we are used to teach in a way that's extremely expertized. Okay, for example, in the health industry, in the doctors or MDs, they are only expertized in one finger or in one hand or else in one muscle. Okay, so but this time is over. Okay, thanks to AI or else. Okay, now I mean we are not the people that only deal with these fingers. We hand over our business or our expertise to the machines, the AI, the intelligent machines, and we have to step up in one level high and try to teach them, okay, what to learn, okay, how to teach, how to learn. So I mean now this is the 21st century's complexity to be tackled, especially as an as a university teacher. So in order to tackle this complexity issue, and as a believer of digitalization and decentralization, and of course a university teacher, I have been trying to impose this interdisciplinary manner to my students. Okay, for this reason I try to set up my teaching methodology on making them live the experience of digitalization and decentralization. Okay, for example, when I teach new media, then I have to teach them Facebook experience, social media experience, mobile app experience. So I mean they have to experience how Zoom works long before COVID comes or happens. Okay, so it happened the same, or it has been happening the same in blockchain. In blockchain, we have to teach, digitalization, decentralization, but there has to be, software developers, there has to be law students, there have to be communication students, there have to be even the art and fine art students, okay, the management students, business students, and else. So that I mean. I try to teach them the methodology in an interdisciplinary manner so that I designed my course open to all students in the university. I, combine them, I make them some interdisciplinary groups, and we start to work. First, in order to live the experience, I start with blockchain, and I form some groups, some interdisciplinary groups, to decentralize the business. Okay, I have a 6 hours long midterm and I gave them an assignment about their a business to decentralize them in some methodologies, okay? What I taught them is not a software, neither a software nor a law, but a code consisting of a law code and a software, okay? A software code. So it's an interdisciplinary manner. Both a law student and a software engineering student must understand in a common way. So that, I mean, when they start to decentralize, because the most important issue to eliminate this complexity is to focusing on decentralization in terms of law and in terms of software, okay? This is a technical architecture, but both as a law architecture or society architecture, as a social contract, okay? It's not a software that can be taught by a software coder, but also even the software coder must understand what John Locke or Jean-Jacques Rousseau said in the social contracts in order to code a smart contract, okay? So in that sense, what I try to teach is just a formation, okay? It's up to them whether to inspire and move forward or not. So that we need some formations in order to teach the interdisciplinary and complexity. So it's very long, and then I mean, let me hand over the word to Toby, and then continue if there is time more.
Well, now that's very interesting, and actually you touched on something there, which is the philosophical approach of working in a decentralized way from all sorts of perspectives, but one of them is technology. And human beings aren't very good at this stuff because human beings like to be in complete control of what it is they're doing. And you see this a lot in software engineering, which is that there is a problem, so they create code to solve that problem. What they don't do is create a scenario where the problem can solve itself. And when you're dealing in decentralized solutions, particularly large-scale ones, you need to think in terms of something that can be parallelized, where all the individual component parts can join together, out of which something grander can emerge. And that's very difficult for programmers. And you see that a lot with increased numbers of CPUs. I mean, I come from, amongst other things, computer games background. And I watched with horror as we got consoles with more than one core CPU, because developers were saying, okay, well, I've got 3, so I'll stick the AI on that one, I'll stick the physics on this one, and everything else on that one. And you'd go, okay, well, now you've got 6, what do you do? And they get to a point where you simply can't subdivide it anymore. And that's the difference between that sort of centralized top-down approach to thinking about things in terms of Lego bricks, to use that analogy again. And if you can't think of it in terms of that, if you can't create a scenario where the problem can be solved, then you're going to not be able to create something that will scale or work in a proper decentralized way. And this is important to us with the autonomous economic agents, building a large population of simple things and creating a decentralized digital environment that could learn how to connect them together in order to allow them to get things done. And on the subject of complexity, I often think of the biggest difference between the 2G, 3G, 4G, and 5G mobile networks is actually the vast quantity of software involved. As you go from 2G to 3G, it multiplies out by a huge amount, and then it just keeps going. And if anything else, the big worry about all of these things is just that many lines of code and that many complex pieces of software that just simply are going to be very, very hard to scale and very, very hard to ensure that they're clean and trustworthy and reliable on a moment-to-moment basis. And I think that when you build things out of bits and pieces, then you get that reliability as part of going through that process. And the blockchain part of things is one of the things that it gives us. And I think that people worry about this stuff, but actually one of the things that blockchain gives you is transparency. And I think a key part of what we talk about when we talk about blockchain is self-service trust. You don't have to believe anybody. You can go and look for yourself. You can work your way through the entire blockchain, which is just a ledger of things that happened in sequence after each other. And you can establish for sure who owns what. And you don't have to ask anybody's permission in order to do that work. And that's one of the really exciting things about this, that transparency. So when it comes to applications like supply chains and so on, where things go in and they go through a sequence and they pop out the other end, being able to track that kind of stuff on a blockchain ensures that nobody can go back and rewrite history for their convenience, and everybody that needs to is able to see it. And I think that when we worry about complexities of all of this, actually what blockchain potentially brings is simplicity, by forcing us to think in this bottom-up way, and forcing us to think in terms of the fact that what we do is visible to everybody.
Thank you for that. I'm going to move to my next question, because we already talked about those complexities. And I would like to ask you how we can improve this education, and what are your suggestions in order to learn more about these technologies, because artificial intelligence and blockchain are two files that people are not clear about it, and also for what Turkish government can do about the enhance this education. So who wants to start? Maybe Professor Ismail, you can start, because I already mentioned Turkish government, so maybe you can have an idea about like what Turkish government can do. You are muted.
Yes.
I mean, yeah. Thank you. Well, the thing is, just let me continue where I left my words. Actually, I mean, it's not a Turkish government's issue, but all governments in the world issue to touch the, you know, or to reshape the or disrupt the, you know, the education system in terms of interdisciplinary manner, because I mean, the industrial age over-expertise based education is not a way to get familiar to blockchain concepts, as Toby touched. Transparency in digital environments, the ledger transparency, the system transparency, but user privacy is a hard thing to understand, okay? And also the crypto security is the enabler of that, okay? And that enables the system to eliminate the intermediaries, the referees, even the government bureaucracy, okay? But first of all, we have to revolutionize, we have to make a revolution in our mindsets, okay? But you know, there is a resistance right now, not in, I mean, we see United States, we see UK governments, even the UK governments, even the their governments, even the EU governments, and all the world. There are two, you know, approaches right now in the world, as we witnessed in the period of COVID, okay? One is super centralized way to solve the problems, as China did, you know, a big brother and super surveilled society with all super centralized networks. For instance, we have been witnessing how China defeated COVID pandemic by using the millions of Skynet cameras, by rewinding their GSM networks, and figured out people that left Wuhan, and they tracked and found them in the whole China land and took all back to Wuhan with those who contacted with them. Okay, in a way, you can regard it as a success, but is it a success? Okay, it's a big brother world, and it's a, but what if this a big brother methodology becomes a routine of your life? What is the outcome? So, West world must immediately move to a from super centralized way to decentralized way, in terms of you know, developing a solution, an alternative to China, even the China. Okay, when the governments are in this mind, then it has a reflection, even the education, even there else. But I see no light. I mean, when I look to how they try to cope with pandemic, is really a disaster, even for the West world or for the East world. not in the East world for the technology and for the use of technology as a big brother, for the West world, for this unskillful way of tackling this problem. So, Toby, you would like to say something?
Yes. What's interesting about, well, firstly, I agree with you. And of course, we suffer from the problem that a centralized approach is alluringly attractive because you get complete autonomy and control to make what you want happen. But of course, there are many different ways of making these things work. And when you look at the technology that Apple and our good friend Uncle Google created, it is possible to do contact tracing in a decentralized way whilst protecting people's privacy. So there are ways of solving these problems that do not require as you put it, a big brother network of cameras everywhere and having a centralized database that controls what everybody can do in their moment-to-moment lives. And I think that's sort of one of the points that we've got to. And when we saw the opportunity to do decentralized contact tracing, we also saw the sheer horror that several governments, including my own, had of like, well, no, we want to do it a different way. We want to do it in a centralized way. We want to collect all of this data. And in the end, of course, the whole thing crashed and burned because it doesn't work anyway, particularly on Apple devices where you can't do that stuff in the background. And now we're back to square one and we don't have anything. And it didn't have to be that way. So we're fighting the fact that it is super duper duper attractive to operate things in a centralized way because you get the illusion of being in control. And for a large number of these things, it is part illusion.
Well, Toby, what I would like to say is, while China is trying to cope with COVID-19 pandemic with some super centralized networks, my students were developing a counter solution based on blockchain to track the COVID patients by their voluntarily, uploading of their knowledge whether they are COVID positive or not and their current state. They developed the algorithm in our midterm workshop by the mentoring of our, of course, expert from industries, from blockchain industry of Turkey. And they developed this solution. Even our government didn't accept it, because I mean, it's not only the government's desire, but also people's digital literacy and understanding to become a volunteer, and that's one of the tackles that must prevent us from becoming a super central or Orwellian world, for the humanity.
And that's a failure of all of us in the technology business. This is one of the things that always frustrated me, that when we watch people who've never used a computer before sit in front of it and find it confusing, it's very easy to say, oh, come on, this is easy. Why are you being so stupid? But the reality is that the computer user interfaces are computer friendly, not human friendly. They're not designed for human beings. They're actually designed for limitations in computing hardware that have long since disappeared. Back in the 70s and 80s, and to a certain degree the 90s, computing power was so limited, memory was so limited that we had to compromise in order to make things work. But those things are gone now. We can entirely design computer experiences around human beings. We can make things human friendly rather than computer friendly. And that's something that all of us need to take some responsibility for thinking about, because that's the only way you're going to onboard people into these systems, by taking advantage of the skills that human beings already have to interact with a complex 3D environment. And just to touch on one other point related to what governments can do with regards to blockchain, because the big R word for regulation hasn't come up yet, but one of the things that everybody has, and we've been finding this a lot, is deciding how and what to regulate. And if we want to embrace this kind of technology, then particularly with things like taxation, we need absolute clarity. Businesses and innovators can't work in an environment when nobody knows. And one of the recent tax documents in the UK, for example, on cryptocurrencies and crypto assets, uses words like probably and might and maybe. There isn't a tax document on the planet that should use words like maybe, might, and probably, because you don't know. I mean, what position are you in under those circumstances? How can you operate a business in that environment, or indeed operate as an individual, where you need a PhD in complex maths and statistics just to work out whether or not you owe any tax? And in order to embrace these technologies properly, we need clarity of that kind of stuff without going too far, because we all know that one of the problems with regulation is regulation and innovation aren't natural partners, but they do need each other, because you need to operate in a safe environment, both those who are creating the technology and using the technology. So trying to sit on that balance as to not over-regulate, but at least do enough to operate in a safe environment is very important. And I think when it comes to anybody adopting this technology and creating clarity, that is one thing that needs to be done. And for the rest of us, I think we need to understand that, and it's one of my favorite quotes from the author of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, Douglas Adams, and I'll get it slightly wrong, but you'll get the gist of it. Douglas said, people don't want technology, they want to get things done. And what technology should do is get things done. And if we have a nice piece of technology that gets things done for us better than before, then it's a winner. And that's what people are interested in doing. That's why people use ride-hailing apps. That's why people use social networking and certain ones rather than others, because they're easy to use. There's no pain involved. You can get on and do it. The fact that you pay a price for that, particularly in privacy and selling your soul from an informational perspective, is a price that people are, as it happens, it turns out, seemingly willing to pay. And for the decentralized solutions where you own your stuff, we're going to need to solve those problems. We're going to need to create a user experience that's perfect for humans. And I guess that's one of the things that we're all trying to do with this technology.
Thank you for that. I want a quick reminder for the audience. There will be a question and answer session in the end of this webinar, so you can write your questions in the chat box, and I will ask those questions to Professor Ismail and Mr. Simpson after this discussion. So I'm going to move my next question. Like, we talk about the emerging technologies and new digital transformation after the coronavirus mostly. So what do you think about like future of AI and blockchain convergence together within like next 3 years, mostly in like Turkish ecosystem, and how this technology is going to change for countries and companies, and what you can bring to the space new, like how we can enable these technologies. So well, Mr. Simpson, like, who wants to start?
Well, maybe I can have an introduction, and I think Toby has many examples for that, I guess. So I may have a quick introduction for that. Actually, I'm in the intersection or in the junction of blockchain and AI. I think what I've said before is the eliminate the the super centralization of AI. It has an opportunity to spread within the industries, within the government, within the societies, social societies, let's say. I can give some examples, but 3 of them are very interesting for me. For example, a few weeks ago, I had a mentorship for a major municipality in Turkey, and we spoke about decentralization of smart cities. And in that sense, I had some scenarios for them. For example, when we have a look to their infrastructure, it's full of they have utilities, they have traffic management system, they have I think some transportation systems, water treatment systems, energy systems, which can be connected in blockchains, and thanks to a big data collection, and thanks to distributed decentralized AIs, they can have some autonomous managements, that can tackle the super centralization and big hacking issues, which can be a disaster for especially the metropoles, okay, which we have already watched in some movies, you know, in some disaster movies. So that this is one of the examples. And also the municipalities or mayorships can tokenize those issues and can create some payment mediums, some rewarding mediums, some interactive mediums for that, in order to, you know, payments of, you know, utilities, some social clubs, some parkings. I think Fetch.ai is some examples for that, and some rewarding mechanism for some, you know, early payments of some taxes, city taxes, and else, for, you know, having some, you know, regular attention of some, you know, city activities or else, and also some polls, some Q&As, and some feedbacks to the mayorships. And also these can pave the way for not only the cities, the metropolitan areas, or for the governments, some decentralized markets, okay, some agricultural markets, food markets, you know, the animal markets or else, but not as happened in China, you know. So in that sense, you know, farmers, you know, producers, or even the, you know, small shop owners can have these, you know, the decentralized markets, and, you know, the price can be formed in a way, in a very transparent manner, without having a, you know, intermediary, without having a manipulative or abusive intermediary. And also, even for the pandemic period, it can have a you know, some support or some charity campaigns against some, you know, some small shop owners, some farmers, which have a financial crisis. I think it can be improved, but my last example is about the financial markets. You know, DeFi, decentralized finance, is a very popular topic nowadays, even in the crypto markets. AI is a very good concept for that. You know, for example, for some peer-to-peer lending, AI-based blockchain, you know, tokens have some very good, you know, interest for both lending and for both, you know, borrowing, so that I mean, they can meet the, you know, the lenders or borrowers in a very fair manner, transparent manner, and also in a very private and anonymous manner that can help even the world to heal from this pandemic.
You're absolutely right about the complexity. I mean, the more complex the plumbing, the easier it is to block up the pipes, right? And there's at least one Die Hard film that factors in this whole business of centralized control in a city, and the ability to take it apart as a result. And so, you know, I certainly take your point about the security of all of those things. And of course, if you start decentralizing these things, individual component parts, you give those parts the autonomy to manage themselves, then it becomes much, much harder to attack a system like that, because it's spread out on many systems, and computers can come and go, and autonomous agents can come and go, but the collective system still works, much in the same way as that you can take a bee out of a population of bees, and so long as you didn't get the queen, you're still in business. And that kind of ability to get the complexity you need out of lots of individual parts is super duper important. And certainly from an AI perspective, I mean, one of the things that I think is happening right now, and certainly over the next few years, is that blockchain's growing up. We're no longer in a position where people look at blockchain and think, oh, Bitcoin, it's that crypto thing, and some people drive around in Lamborghinis and others get very poor. Isn't that it? It's like, no, now we're realizing that it's actually the underlying technology that is interesting in blockchain, what it is that we can do with that. And we're seeing it as a technological component that we can manage complexity with and deal with things at scale. And certainly infrastructure and smart cities is a great example of an area where this can help. And this is why we thought at Fetch, autonomous agents were so important, because if we could, for want of a better word, inhabit all of the devices and piece of data with something that was in charge of its own economic destiny, and exploring ways of delivering its value in a way that made sense, then we could operate that effectively at scale. I'll give you a couple of examples. One of them is in self-driving cars. Traditional AI is right at the limit of its ability to recognize what's going on with cameras and figure out what to do. But if you start augmenting that reality by bringing to life all of the things around, junctions and road signs and bits and pieces, stick agents in them and get them to announce themselves, then suddenly you're creating an environment where you've got as I refer to it, the ultimate cheat mode. You can see through fog, round corners. You can see signs that have fallen over, traffic lights that have failed. You can see all of these things because that information has been provided to you. When you augment the reality that you get from cameras, then you suddenly bring the level of processing down on a self-driving vehicle to a point it's almost within grasp of what it is that we can do now. It's the same thing that goes on with supply chain management and managing mobility and transportation. If this is done at a large scale in smart cities or even non-smart cities, just by taking advantage of the fact there are mobile devices everywhere, then we can start making some enormous progress with just taking some of the problems out of our day-to-day lives. And I think we forget sometimes just how much of a hassle we go through in order to get anything done. I mean, a few months have been locked down, and sitting at home has made us forget just how difficult travel is, just how difficult the logistics of anything actually turns out to be. And having lots of these autonomous agents working for you, trying to solve these problems for you and delivering solutions to you, I think is super exciting. And that's only possible because a blockchain can underpin that. And then there's things like collective learning, where you've got lots of people who have information that needs to remain confidential for some reason. Like, for example, hospitals have various data. They'd love to be able to contribute all of their data to build a collective model, but there's no practical way of doing so. You combine decentralization through blockchain and collective learning techniques, and suddenly you can do that. And life's no longer a zero-sum game, and everybody can benefit from contributing whilst keeping things that are confidential and keeping things that need to remain private. And those also scale. Anybody can be part of that, and anybody can then benefit from that kind of thing. And I'd say anything with a large number of moving parts is something that blockchain can come in and make things better. As to whether or not breaking down centralized AI is something that could be effectively done, I guess that depends on whether or not we can break down collective knowledge into its individual component parts. And it seems to be something that hangs out in the back of your mind as something that may be a problem. Reading between the lines.
Thank you for that discussion. I would like to move to the question and answer part because we are already over our discussion time. But I would like to ask first, Professor Ismail, do you have last word about this discussion? Or I will just move to the question and answer session.
Well,
do you have any last words?
We have, yes, limited time. So I think it's better to move the questions. I think that it's going to be an endless question. But what I realized is AI should be a must for blockchain to save the world. I mean, I have now realized it. I mean, thanks Toby, Toby's emphasis and comments, I think I realized those, very clear and very, concise manner. Okay.
So there is a question from Berkay Soylu. He said, I want to be a data scientist and blockchain is a huge concept, which I don't know where to begin. As people who have expertise in this concept, could you explain and show me which to begin would be the most beneficial for a data scientist in considering today's and tomorrow's world? So, Mr. Simpson, do you want to start, or Professor Ismail, who wants to start?
Okay, well, this is one of those, that's one of those questions that's deceptively simple, but incredibly complex to answer. Blockchain's a big subject, and the easiest way to get involved is just to start, but also to understand right from the outset what it actually is. And blockchain is there to maintain the integrity of an ongoing ledger and a method of reaching consensus for how you would add something to the end of that ledger. And when you've got a trustworthy data structure, you can do incredible things with it. and everything else that we're talking about, all the AI side of things, all of the managing of smart cities, supply chains, and everything else comes out of that one concept that we have a reliable way of establishing a sequence of events and who did what and when they did it, but more importantly, who owns what and how that actually happened. So for a data scientist, this is a great tool because suddenly you've got the ability to access data, you've got the ability to be able to get data processed on multiple machines whilst maintaining its privacy where that's important. And there is now a mechanism for all of that data that's out there that you wish you had. It's now possible to find it. And that's one of the things that we're doing with autonomous agents that represent data sets and represent individual items of data. Using advanced AI, so for example, embeddings to create a semantic view in the world. So that if you're interested in a particular subject area, all the things that are near to that can be presented to you. And that kind of stuff is really exciting because all of that stuff that you wouldn't find if you looked it up specifically can now come and find you when you want it. So, you know, it's a great place to be, data science right now. And it's even better that all that untapped data that's currently out there is suddenly going to be within your grasp.
So, Professor Ismail, do you have any suggestions
Yes.
on that?
Actually, Toby put a very wide emphasis and no word left. But maybe as an academician, I can have a distinction to compare, let's say, blockchain and data science, where they, collide, where they split. Once, I mean, primarily, data science is a methodology, okay? Whereas blockchain is a, how shall I say, is an architecture, okay? So that, first of all, he has a primary, okay? Whether to choose an architecture or to methodology, okay? Then they have collisions, they have splits, but I mean, in combination with what Toby said, I think there are, for example, some collisions in smart city and the other applications. But first of all, he has to decide whether to go deeply on data science or blockchain, okay? These are two different ways. And when he selects one, the other should be minor of that or complementary of that. But right now, nowadays, data science is a very, popular tool. And, there is growing, need to data scientists. But, I mean, as a data scientist, only to collecting data or to, clustering data is not enough. You have to also complement it with behavioral science, okay? Otherwise, if you don't have, or if you have a lack of social science, then you can do not a very, efficient data science thing in your or throughout your professional career. So that please be aware of the interdisciplinary, spirit of the, time, and when selecting your, primary and complementary issues, please beware of your interdisciplinary skills. Even you select one expertise, you have to garnish it with other complementary, social. If you are technical, you have to garnish it with some social aspects, or vice versa. So this is the recommendation I have to put on.
That's a really, really good point. Blockchain is a tool to help you. It's not a thing in its own right. It's something that will allow you to get access to this other information that you need. Yeah.
Thank you for that. It was really important to know that. And I will move to the next question from Oğuzhan Berberoğlu. He asked, when will be the technology that Fetch provides can be used in Turkey, and is it available to use in UK?
Yeah, it's there now. And we're having a lot of fun right now building an enormous number of autonomous economic agents. We've just done a bunch of these things representing all of the trains and railway stations in the UK. And we're also, we've got a very cool project that shows a decentralized ride-hailing application actually working. And we're expanding that with an increased population of agents representing things like car parks and traffic congestion and many other things, so that in one simple search, you can get all the information you need to be able to do some really, really interesting things. And all of those agents exist in our decentralized digital world, and all of them transact on the blockchain. And you can download all of the bits and pieces and all the code for that right now, this afternoon or this evening, and you can build those agents yourself. And we're very, very excited as that population of agents grows to be able to build all of these things and show them to everybody. And also increase visualization, because we've got this fantastic decentralized environment where all these agents exist. There are some truly beautiful ways of visualizing this. In fact, funnily enough, as data scientists know, one of the things that's really interesting is figuring out how you can visualize your data in interesting ways that people understand, but also can see the beauty of the structure that you're creating. So we'll be doing a lot more of that as the months roll on.
Thank you for that. I think there is no another question. I'm waiting, but I can see it. So
maybe I can have an addition for that,
yeah,
and a question to Toby, maybe. Well, when I went to my hometown, Eskişehir, I think it's somewhere in between Ankara and Istanbul, our capital and our largest city. I noticed that the traffic lights waiting times are very long, so that sometimes, we wait, but wait for nothing, there is no car coming from the other side, and it lights green, and we waste time. I think blockchain-based AI is a very good example of that, because the current systems are, autonomous or less autonomous, let's say, whereas they need to be intelligent. They need to have intelligence, okay, and this intelligence should be, decentralized in order to, have some autonomous parts of the city, and of course, they have the data can be combined by a data scientist, but AI in that manner can help to keep autonomy and put some, local intelligence to eliminate the problems happened locally.
That's exactly it. Local intelligence. I wrote a blog post about a year ago that pointed out that if you could stick a human being in a seat on top of every single traffic signal with a pair of binoculars, you would end up with the most optimized traffic that you could possibly get if the human being was paid on the basis of how they reduced congestion. But you'd also get other fringe advantages, like the human being would be able to talk to other traffic lights nearby on the phone and say, oh, you've got what? You've got an ambulance coming. Okay, I'll clear it up for you. And that ability to be able to adapt to the local environment is super duper important. And given that almost everybody now drives around with a mobile phone, you could operate an agent on that represented you, your needs, your desires. The traffic signal can effectively find out who's nearby and who's doing what. And instead of having to rely on these ridiculous motion sensors that you sometimes get on these things that don't pick up pedestrians or cyclists particularly well, suddenly you can get this very, very good picture of what's going on. And the signals can then adapt to the local needs. And then you don't get that ridiculous situation that you've pointed out, that in the middle of the night when there's nobody else around, the traffic signal goes red for no obvious reason. And you sit there for a few minutes thinking, what is it for? I mean, why? And it's those kind of frustrations that we can take out with this local knowledge and these small pockets of intelligence, rather than having to try and manage all of that from one central place. So absolutely.
And you I think you reward this with tokenization, huh? For example, when some agent, for example, on behalf of municipality uses this initiative, because when he turns the light from nonsense reds to green, he or she should be rewarded,
Correct.
by, saving time, saving, gasoline, saving oil, saving many things, even
Absolutely.
in the rush hours. So that I think it can be connected to smart city management, and it can be returned as a reward token or else.
Absolutely. And you get something then that the agents that are responsible for managing these have an incentive to solve this problem, because they get rewarded for doing so. And because of that, you don't end up with any of these dumb things right now that, for example, if something changes, like, for example, COVID-19, of course, then all of the traffic signals are pre-programmed with a sequence that works for whatever day of the week it is. And they can't adapt to these things. So they can't even adapt when around Cambridge when it rains a lot and more people are in their cars rather than on their bikes. Whereas, of course, you start doing it with this way, incentivization via tokenization and large-scale decentralized network, then those things will adapt immediately to the changing environment. And that's exactly the kind of thing which is there to make better use of the infrastructure and make our lives a little bit, well, nicer.
Well, I mean, if I'm an, for example, unemployed or fired employee, person, then I mean, if government assigns me to detect such kind of, bottlenecks in the city movement to save time, to save money or else, then I mean, I can join or I can involve the economy by having some, incentives, so that, I mean, it's a way to, make people to turn, I mean, not, I mean, millions of, token in the beginning, but at least to save their, to survive them, let's say.
Absolutely. It's a wonderful thing to be able to do because all of that value comes back to individuals. There's a great incentive for doing so. And there's also an incentive for increased autonomy in the individual component parts, because then if you're managing agents that represent 1,000, 2,000 things, then the transactions may be for 1/10 of a cent a pop, but it doesn't matter. They're in such large amounts that sooner or later that turns out to be a very reasonable amount. And without a third party taking 30 to 40% off the top because they feel the need to do so, to connect everything together, then it starts looking very, very attractive and giving these wonderful options to people.
Thank you for that discussion. I think it was really nice, but I have to stop a little bit because there's another question just came in the chat box, and I want to ask that, and we have a little bit time. So I think you can answer that question really shortly. Gülce Akpınar said, I was wondering whether you believe that the lack of law regulation around the blockchain will be benefit for us to apply blockchain in business use cases, because in this case we don't have to deal with the government, or do you think it's the other way around?
Okay, so yeah, that's a pretty broad subject, and I touched on a bit of it because I think that these things should go hand in hand. You don't want to over-regulate new technology, because then everything gets stuck in treacle and can't go anywhere. But on the other hand, if you under-regulate it, then it's very dangerous for everybody, those that are creating and those that are using. One of the and we don't want to confuse regulation in this space with the freedom of individuals to onboard themselves onto those systems, which you can. That's an advantage of the technology. With blockchain, I can set up 10 Bitcoin accounts this evening or 10 Fetch wallets this evening, and I can get on board the system, and I can bootstrap myself into the network when I choose to. If the work that I'm going to do on the network requires KYC and AML, then I can potentially use verifiable credentials to prove that I've had these things done without disclosing the information. It's like being able to say, I am over 18, but without giving you my birth date. And that privacy protecting way of being able to assert the things that are important, but still be in control of onboarding yourself into these systems is super important.
Thank you for that. There is another question, so
well,
I think that should be the last question. Professor Ismail, do you want to add something?
Well, yes. In order to regulate something, you have to understand what it is first.
Yes.
And you need to understand pros and cons, and then decide accordingly. For example, for blockchain, you need to understand what is the meaning of eliminating the intermediaries, what is the meaning of both having privacy, user privacy, and public ledger publicity, and also the crypto security. If you don't understand the magical mixture of them, please leave it as it is and do not regulate.
Yes.
Thank you for that comment. I will ask another question, and I think that will be the last question from Berkay Soylu. He said, the coming of 6G technology will bring huge amount of data and incredible data speed. Do you think it will change today's societies and government's perspective towards blockchain, such as many things you mentioned are plans for the structure of smart cities? Do you think will these cities influence and change how the rest of the world live in the future?
I think it'll make life nicer. I think it will give us a more personalized experience. I think that these technologies will give us something that's adapted to us. And you know, we live in a world where increasingly one size fits all, and the services that we get and the things that we get are increasingly the same as each other. And this kind of technology, when it's done right, means that, you know, everybody's different, everybody's problems are different, everybody's lives are different. So the solutions for every individual are different. And blockchain and AI, collective learning, autonomous agents, and all of these wonderful things allow in real time for the solutions to adapt to your unique needs. I think that's very, very cool.
Thank you for that. Professor Ismail, do you want to add something?
I love this idea and recommend Berkay to move forward.
Okay, thank you for that. So for the last note, I thank you both of you for your time. And this was really interesting discussion. I hope the audience also enjoyed it. And we had lots of points about these emerging technologies that have been covered in this discussion. Both of you could maybe address one wish to the industry and to the other one and to the audience. So the Professor Ismail, if you would give one wish to the industry, and in this case, Mr. Simpson, on behalf, what should they do? What would you like to see more on this topic?
Well, as I said, I mean, when I see when I realize the combination of AI and blockchain, I realize that it can save the world. So I pray Toby to penetrate the market for Fetch.ai more and more to save the world. Thank you.
Thank you. We're on the case. You know, for all of those out there in industry who are thinking that this won't happen, it won't come, and they can just sort of pretend that it's not there. That's not going to make it disappear. It is coming. And if we all work together with these technologies, then there is a great opportunities for us to be able to adapt, to be flexible in the future. And I would like to say, President, I'd love to have a separate conversation with you about AI, centralized and decentralized. I think that would be an absolutely fascinating conversation. And I would really enjoy that.
Looking forward to.
Thank you for you, like both of you, for your time. And for the audience, I will have to make some comments. If you have any questions about blockchain and this webinar series, you can follow Ben Turkey on Instagram and LinkedIn. And thanks for the audience coming and joining us today. So have a good evening to all of the people in here, and to Professor Ismail and to Mr. Simpson, you too.
Thank you so much for having us. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you for your time again. So have a nice evening.
You too. Thank you.